God didn't say anything new yet. So we look at Torah as a consistent user's manual for life. So obviously, there's going to be lessons for life in everything we read yesterday. I'm going to focus on one area of the Torah portion, and something that's a little bit unusual if we look at the Torah narrative, and that is that from when Moses is born, which is the very first Torah portion in the second book of the Torah, and we're still in the second book of the Torah. But then going forward, once Moses is born, he is the most central actor in whatever narrative we're doing. And now, so there's in the story, and then the fact that when God is giving mitzvahs, the consistent refrain is God said to Moses to tell the Jews. That's because Torah is written in the first four books of the Torah are written like from a narrator's perspective, and the narrator, I think they call it the omnipotent narrator of the scripture, is God said to Moses, just telling you what happened. So Moses is mentioned in every Torah portion, just of the necessity. Not only mentioned, he's really taking up a major space in every Torah portion from the time he's born, which is the very beginning of the second book of the Torah. The only Torah portion where his name is not mentioned is what we read yesterday morning. His name does not appear there. He's there because it's God talking to him, but there are pronouns, but not Moses' name, which is an interesting aside, you'd think. But there's no such thing as an interesting aside in Torah. There's always a lesson. So let's look at this for a second and bring this up. So the Torah began in what we read yesterday. Again, we're heading towards the end of the book of Exodus, and where God says, "And you means Moses, shall command the children of Israel." Remember, we have just the prior Torah portions about the building of the tabernacle and the holy furniture in the tabernacle, including the menorah, and they shall take to you pure olive oil. So Moses, even though he's not a Kohen, he's a Levi, and the Kohens are the functionaries. Here they're getting going with the actual function of the tabernacle. At this point, on the calendar, the Jews are approaching they're within 2 weeks of the first anniversary of Passover. Their first anniversary of their liberation from Egypt. They're still in the Sinai desert. They haven't moved from there. Meanwhile, they got the Torah. They had the whole saga, 40 days. Then they get to work building the tabernacle. They're waiting for the tabernacle to have opening day. And now we're approaching opening day. God tells Moses, you have a menorah, you have wicks, you need oil. And the oil has a lot of special significance, and therefore they tell the children of Israel they shall take to you. In other words, they should process it and bring it to you, pure olive oil, crushed for lighting, to kindle the lamps continuously. Okay, continually. That's a functional thing. That's how it begins. Now again, Moses is there because Moses is the you, but Moses' name does not appear there or through the rest of the Torah portion. One of our greats from the 1300s, Rabbi Yaakov Baal Turim, says on this, he notes, Moses is not mentioned at all in this Torah portion, although he's mentioned in every other Torah portion. From the time of his birth is recorded through the end of the Torah. So then Rabbi Yaakov Baal Turim gives a reason. There's got to be significance there. Why would Moses' name not appear in this Torah portion? So he notes that in the next Torah portion, when there is the saga of the golden calf, which we will speak about next week, we'll study more about next week because that's in the next Torah portion. But what he's referring to, the Rabbi Yaakov Baal Turim refers to, it says in that Torah portion, Moses fights for the Jews, and he pushes back against God, saying, "I'm going to wipe them all out. We'll start a new people from you." Look what they did. 40 days they can't hold on to themselves after I gave them a Torah and I had this incredible revelation and interface with them. One of the things that Moses says when he pushes back against God, Moses says, "Now, if you forgive their sin, tells God, if you forgive the Jews, we're good. But if not, erase me now from your book which you have written. He speaks fighting words and tells God, you know something? If you can't forgive the Jews, take me out of the Torah, because there's already been something written. You didn't have the whole Torah when Moses came down from Sinai, because it's playing out over 40 years. It's not completed until the end of 40 years. But some Torah is there. Whatever you have, take me out, which is a big insult. Now, Moses didn't say, take me out. He says, if you don't forgive them. It's what we would call a conditional curse. Something saying, if you do that, we're done. And the Talmud teaches that even the conditional curse of a righteous person is fulfilled. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because that's not the focus of today, but it is a principle of Talmudic thinking that we have to be very careful with how we speak. The Rebbe, I saw in action, always was very careful about how he spoke, even though he wasn't always speaking about, butterflies and roses, but he was always very careful not to use harsh language and negative language, and certainly not about wishing anything or on anyone or on themselves or in himself. So the idea of in Torah thinking to say, if that happens, I'm going to have a heart attack. Or if that happens, I'll kill you, is really not Torah way of speaking. Because it's, even though it's just words, right? And sticks and stones may break my bones, but names never harm. But that's actually not Jewish thinking, because names do harm. First of all, psychologically they do. But aside from that, spiritually speaking, words are powerful. Words come from our soul. We have souls. We're pieces of God walking the planet. And if we have, I'm just going to come back to this in a second, but if we're saying harsh language in some subtle spiritual level, we're creating, there's a negative energy. Why would we do that? There's a Hasidic story about how the Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, he was in a shul, and one person was yelling at another person, and they were fighting. Who knows what they were fighting about? Two Hasidic gentlemen, or not such gentlemen, and one says to the other, "I'm going to tear you apart like a fish." And the Yisrael Baal Shem Tov asked everyone to gather around, hold hands, and close their eyes, and they had a vision of this guy literally ripping the other guy apart, which is gruesome. Now, obviously, it didn't happen. But he was showing them how when you say something like that, words are mean things. Again, legally, it may mean nothing unless it's notarized and witnessed. But spiritually, it means something. And we have to be careful with our words. So what the Talmud is saying is that when it comes to, if I say, or if a person says, if that happens, I'll die, or I'm going to have a heart attack, which I'm just using this, it's not good words, but I'm just using for illustrative purposes, then the Torah is not saying, watch out, you're going to have a heart attack. It's saying it's wrong. But for a righteous person, words have that much more impact because they're that much more in touch with their own souls. Even if it's a conditional curse, it does come to pass somehow. So therefore, the language of Rabbi Yaakov Baal Turim is, since Moses made this conditional curse saying, if you don't forgive the Jews, then I want to be erased from your Torah, that's stuck. He did get erased a little bit. He got erased in this week's Torah portion. Now, why this week's Torah portion is a good question. First of all, we didn't even read the story yet. It'll be later. Why do we pick this week's Torah portion for his name not to be there? Now, one of the Hasidic greats of the 1700s, he gives a thought. We're not going to go there. I'm just throwing this out there because it's commonly known. Rabbi Nachum of Chernobyl, he opines, commentators have already noted that Moses' name is not mentioned in this week's Torah portion, and he says why? Why is this week's Torah portion? Because Moses' Yartzeit, which is the 7th of Adar, always falls in the week of this Torah reading. This Torah reading is always the week of the 7th of Adar. Since Moses passes away, in other words, he's missing in physical sense on the 7th of Adar. That was the Torah portion that was chosen to have his name not mentioned, even though he's mentioned. He's center stage, the whole Torah portion. His name isn't mentioned. But why that Torah portion which coincides with when he went missing, so to speak, physically. But and that's an angle. It's not the angle taken by Rabbi Yaakov Turim or many others. So the question is, why would that be? Why would the Torah have chosen this Torah portion to take to have his name not be seen? No, I'll go this way for a second. Now, first of all, as I said, he is mentioned. So it's not like he's missing from the stage. And the Torah begins with the word Va'ata, you. Who's you? Moses. As a matter of fact, you, when it comes in Torah thinking, if we want to drill down a little bit into human function, how we function with each other, a name. Why do I need a name? I need a name for other people to identify me. That's what my name is used. When I'm sitting here alone, studying, praying, thinking, whatever, I don't really need my name unless I'm signing a document. A name is very close to my heart. We all relate very much to our names, but a name is somewhat of an external handle to be able to identify or get someone's attention. Now, when we say giving this, I'm sorry. If I say something, I'm giving this to you, or if I look at you, you is when I'm addressing someone, and it's beyond the name. It's you, because even names. Some people call me Mendy. Some people call me Rabbi. Some people call me Daddy. So whatever. I got a bunch of names. Some of them I probably won't want to share. These are what people call me just to refer to me because they know me in different ways. You means you with all your manifestations. It's a much more essential way of referring to someone. So in a way, it's a little funny that we say it's Moses' name is missing from the Torah portion. And it's like, well, that's not good. He wouldn't be happy about that. But on the other hand, Moses is mentioned, and we started off with a you, and you in a way goes deeper than name. So it's really not such a negative. We have to get our minds around what is the Torah teaching us by leaving his name out. If you look at note number 4, the Klayokar on the verse says the verse uses the pronoun you, as in God directly addressing Moses, because God is addressing Moses' essence. So what's the deal? There's no downside. Say, well, he made this drastic curse. If God doesn't forgive the Jews and take my name out of your book, taking my name out of your book, you'd think was a negative thing. And then, well, he said it. It's going to show up. One Torah portion is not going to have your name. It's actually much deeper than that. It's who says that having the name would be an advantage here. Maybe it addresses the essence. Maybe that's even more. So now let's get into a little bit of actually. Let me bring it back up. Of what went on with that narrative. Again, it's next week. We'll talk more about it next week. We're talking about just the idea that somehow that impacted that Moses' name is not here. The Medrash tells us that Moses and Torah are very connected, inextricable. It's called the scripture refers to the Torah, even though Torah is God's Torah. It's referred to Moses' Torah. And actually, every morning, the very beginning of our prayers, we say, Moses commanded the Torah, gave us a Torah. Moses was just a messenger, but Moses is so linked with Torah. And you'll find that when one devotes one's life to a specific end, the Mendy tells us in 5, that matter is referred to by one's name. Moses devoted his life to Torah and is called by Moses' name, as it says in Malachi, which is one of our prophets. And it's a book of the 12 prophets. Remember the Torah of Moses, my servant. That's the language of God. Now, if the Medrash asks, is it not God's Torah? But it's called by Moses' name because he devoted his life to Torah. So the idea that you think about when Moses is standing before God, and he says, the Jews screwed up. I know they screwed up. This was a really big deal, and I have more for us to look at it in the notes. What they did with the disobeying God, being disloyal to God by creating the golden calf, not 40 days after they got the Torah, is something that has resonance. The Torah says it will have resonance for the rest of history. It's something that left a scar on us. Not all transgressions do. This was really big. Now, Moses is a guy who says, I have Torah is everything to me. And there are people, there's a demographic. It wasn't all the Jews. There's a demographic who has done a terrible thing. And God says, look what they did. And Moses isn't saying they didn't do it. He knows they did it. So Moses is now faced with this idea of now the Jews have done something terrible. And God isn't saying, I'm done with this project or with this experiment. I'm just going to get rid of these people and we're going to start over again. Instead of Moses recognizing the truth of the matter, which is that people did do something wrong, and God had a reason to say what he was saying, Moses is willing to have his name erased from the Torah. And the Torah means everything to him. We think. Torah is saying he devoted his life to Torah. It's called his Torah. And now, because of he's defending the Jews, he says, erase me now from your book. And Rashi says from the entire Torah. Not just from one thing, but from everything. I'm gone. I'm out of this. And why is he doing it? He's doing it to somehow protect the Jews against being punished for something. If we look at 8, God said about this specific transgression, on the day I make an accounting, on the day, I just lost it, and they make an accounting of sins upon them, I will bring their sin to account against them. In other words, any time there is this idea of God bringing an accounting to the Jewish people throughout history, that there's a problem, and there's going to be consequences. There's always going to be a tinge of the golden calf. It was that bad, and yet Moses says, "I'm not. I get it. I get that there's a point that you're making you're God, and you're making a calculation that makes sense. But if you're going to go through with this, if you're going to hold them accountable as the law would say, I'm out. And I'm willing to be out of my Torah. It's his Torah. There's this deep bond he has with Torah. We're done. Now, if you look in number 9, now, an odd thing about this, because we still have questions like, why would Moses? First of all, there are 2 things. Moses, why doesn't Moses just say, God, you're right? But it's something you made people with such a difficult nature. I want you to tweak human nature so they don't fall into these problems. Number 2, why does he have to go so far and take my name out of the Torah? What does the Torah have to do with it? Say to God, something, if you're not going to forgive them, then kill me too, or punish me too. Where's the correlation? Where's the causal connection somehow between that? If you don't forgive the Jews, I should be taken out of the Torah. Who mentioned the Torah? This isn't about the Torah, it's about their behavior. And God is holding them accountable for their behavior. And the truth is, Moses had no way of being accountable because he wasn't even there. He wasn't around. He couldn't have stopped them. But why does he pick on his place in the Torah? Now, another odd thing about this is that when Rashi explains why does Moses say, I'm going to pick me out of the Torah, look at 9. It says, take it from me out of your book, from the entire Torah, so that they will not say about me that I didn't beg Mishra for the Israelites. Moses, it seems on the face of it, Moses is worried about his own PR. Moses is saying, you know something? This is not going to work. Because if you punish the Jews now, this is what is going to go down in history. I'm going to go down as the guy who didn't protect the Jews. Take me out. If I'm not going to be there with proper billing, if I'm not going to have the press I appreciate, take me out of the whole book. That's the way it sounds from Rashi, which it sounds like kind of a self-serving thing. Here, Moses seems to be really putting himself out for the Jewish people, and then the way Rashi frames it wasn't about for the Jewish people, it was about his own reputation. He doesn't want people, maybe it's the Egyptians or other people in the world singing him, Moses, great leader. Look, he couldn't even stop this. So that Rashi is kind of a strange thing. So let's take a look at number 10. Number 10. And this is about, before we do that, Jewish leadership in Torah thinking. Jewish leadership is very much about a leader being absolutely, totally invested in the leader's people, in his or her people. That's what leadership is. Leadership is not about having a seat of honor. Leadership is not about having a crown on your head, about being able to drive in a limousine. Being a leader is about being a servant. Being a leader is about being connected, focused on the needs of the people one is leading. And that means there's much more less room for self because there's so much to care about in the flock who needs leading. And there's a very deep bond between leader. Again, I'm not talking about Henry VIII. I'm talking about the Jewish leadership. There's a deep bond between the leader and the people. So one of the things, no, I don't think that worked. Second, I'm going to go back to share screen. What Rashi tells us later on in the Torah, it happens to be later on in the Torah, but it's a concept that is timeless. Rashi on Numbers 21:21, he says, Moses is Israel and Israel is Moses. You cannot separate between the leader and the people. They're inseparable. Moses was he actually had children too, but we're not his connection to the people is like a connection of a parent or more. They're inseparable. For that reason, when God says to Moses, when Moses is up the mountain, the first time he's up on the mountain, and everything seems nice, peachy. It's great. God, they had this wonderful experience, and God has given him the Torah. He's up on the mountain with God. The people are ostensibly waiting down at the bottom of the mountain, waiting for him to come down with tablets and with information. But God tells Moses, by the way, you got problems. God said to Moses, go descend, for your people that you've brought up from the land of Egypt have acted corruptly. This is something that it says, go descend. Rashi says, go descend from your own greatness. What does that mean? That means that Moses, when the Jews take a tumble, when a leader's people misbehave, the leader is impacted, even if the leader didn't do anything wrong. Because if my kids, my people, are going through a problem, it's my problem. I can't divorce myself from that. I can't say, well, listen, they did it, I didn't do it. They're my people. So Moses God is telling, when God is saying go descend, literally means go descend from the mountain. But what the Talmud says is, no, you are now yourself. You're spiritually taking a tumble because your people took a tumble. You don't get to sit on your throne. I'm okay. It impacts you. You are the people and the people are you. There's that profound a connection. And so if you take a look now, so Moses has this very deep connection between God, him and the Jews. He has this incredible connection between him and the Torah. And so he has now a conflict, because when they violated Torah, which is so important to him, but they violated Torah, and they're important to him. So he's conflicted. Which is more important to Moses, the Jews or the Torah? Well, Moses reflects God. So let's take a look at where are God's priorities. On the one hand, the Talmud tells us that when God gave us the Torah, the first word of the Ten Commandments is Anochi, I. And the Talmud tells us it's an acronym for I have invested my soul into this document, the Torah. In other words, when we study Torah, when we hold a Torah, when we see a Torah, when we study Torah, it's not just a wisdom or a document or ideas that are spawned by the divine. God says, I have invested my soul into this document. Studying Torah is absorbing godliness. Godliness comes into our lives, into our souls, into our brains through Torah. It's inseparable. So God's very close with Torah. The Medrash tells us, God said, I love two things with my entire heart, Torah and the Jews. But I don't know which one takes precedence. Okay, I don't know. Torah or Jews, which way direction do we go? Some would speculate that the Torah takes precedence given its intense holiness. But I, God, say that Jews take precedence. For if not for them, I would not create the world and Torah would have no expression. In other words, God is saying Torah is so important to me. But Torah is in a way, it's a tool. In a way, it's a function for something. The function is that the Jews are going to use it to perfect the world. They're going to use it to bring holiness to the world. So while God presents this balance of values, Jews, Torah, it's not an easy thing, and God doesn't want to have to choose between them. God says, if I had to, if you really want to look at the food chain and rank them, I'm going to say that the Jews take precedence. The Jews are at the top of that chain. And as the Medrash tells us, the righteous are similar to their creator, which means Moses. Moses reflects God's values. And therefore, when Moses wants to balance and is looking at this terrible situation, his Torah or values are being violated by his people, he'll say, you know something? I'm going to stand up for the Jews. And the fact that it violates Torah law is terrible. It's tragic. But I'm standing with my Jews. God, you need to forgive them. And just want to, Barbara, you had a question. Just give me 1 second.
Yes. How strong was it? We're discussing the strength of Moses, who was willing to challenge, God's decision with regards to the Jews. How strong was it for the women? We're talking about valor and leadership. How strong was it for the women to not contribute to building the golden calf? Wouldn't you say that the same strength existed where they valued the Torah and refused to participate in its violation? Wouldn't that equal almost the leadership quality that Moses had when he confronted God?
I'm not sure it's the same there. I don't know how to measure that. I would say that certainly the women who did not partake in the golden calf are seen as having deep vision, insight into the spiritual dynamics going on, and they had the strength and the discipline to stay loyal to God. I don't know that they were faced with the same predicament as Moses. I'm not sure I would compare it exactly. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to understate the value of what the women did. At the same time, I'm not sure that I would overstate it just to make sure I'm not understating it. I don't know how it's not. I just don't see the same same thing. We don't find that they had any struggle, or that they I don't know that the women stood up that the violating Jews should not be punished. I don't know that it says that anywhere. Maybe they did. It wasn't the same predicament. Here, Moses doesn't have the option of just standing to the side and saying, "Oh my gosh, this is horrible, and I didn't do it, and you guys shouldn't have done it." Now God's talking to him. He's not talking to the women here. He's talking to him and saying, I'm going to punish the offenders, and we're going to wipe this. Now we're going to start all over again. And Moses responds, and he has to choose somewhat between his loyalty to Torah and his loyalty to the Jews. And it's I mean, he's always going to be loyal to God, but God has made his decision. So if he chooses loyalty to Torah, he's standing with God. He's saying, "Go ahead, do your thing. I totally get you, boss." But here, for Moses to push back against God, that can't be easy, but he does, and he doesn't only do it for the women, because that would make more sense. He does it for everybody, even the violators. And his idea, and this is something that Talmud tells us, is that a Jew, despite his or her sins, is still a Jew. That is a Jewish leadership idea, recognizing the value that we have as a family, despite individual choices. We don't have to, and we shouldn't be approving of our neighbors, friends, family members' choices if they're not moral. That's not what the loyalty we're talking about. And as a matter of fact, loyalty and courage would call me to tell someone, because I'm your friend, because I really care about you, because I love you, because we're family, I want to explain that I really think that you should rethink your choices. So, but if they don't, and if they're making the choices that are, and we know choices could, God forbid, be really really negative ones, they never lose their status as my brother, my cousin, or my fellow Jew. It says the Jew, even though they sin, the Talmud tells us they're a Jew. And Moses stands up for that principle. He's not looking to protect those who didn't partake in this. He's protecting them all because they're all his people. So this is an idea of Jewish leadership, and I want to talk a little bit further.
I don't
So actually, you know something? Let's do one more. Let's look at what the Rabbi says here in 17. Moses was saying to God, if this sin of God, the golden calf, is so terrible that Torah leaves no room for forgiveness. Moses, when he's talking to God, He says, okay, so we have rules here, and we have consequences because the Torah sets out behavior and behavioral consequences. So because what they did was they chose to create a golden calf, therefore the consequence is you're going to get rid of it. So in other words, Hashem, the loving parent, would forgive. You as a parent, you'd be able to get past it, God. This is what I'm understanding Moses is saying. But Moses is saying to God, this is what I'm getting. It's the Torah is getting in the way here. The law leaves no room for forgiveness in this case. If that's the case, God, if the relationship that you as a parent have with your children, if that can't trump the rules for the relationship, then erase me from your book. Then I don't want to. I don't want anything with this. This argument laid bare Moshe's essential bond with the Jewish people. The argument with God is where Moses had to lay it down the line. He loves Torah. It's Moses' Torah. He devotes his life to the Torah. He's identified as the Torah for posterity. But saying if Torah is getting in the way of God, your forgiveness of the Jewish people, then I don't want your Torah. Take me out. And that in and of itself, Moses was reminding God that not only is Moses saying that I care more about the Jews than I care about the Torah. So God, why do I care more about the Jews? Because you care more about the Jews than you care about the Torah. This laid bare God's essential bond with the Jewish people, and this bond is what brought forgiveness. What brings forgiveness on Yom Kippur? What brought forgiveness there? Brings forgiveness on Yom Kippur is that any healthy parent, when a child comes, no matter what they've done, and unfortunately, God forbid, unfortunately, sometimes children could do terrible things, and there are consequences, and there's tough love, and sometimes there's distance, and all of that. But the child comes and says, I know I did something wrong, but it's me, mom and dad. If they know they did something wrong, what more do you have to teach them? Why do we have discipline? Why do we have punishments? Because you want to teach someone to do the right thing. We don't punish it as revenge. We don't punish it, I'm going to get you back. Which parent wants to get their child back? Parent wants to teach a child. And once you know the child has learned the lesson, there's no point to this anymore. That's what happens Yom Kippur. And that's what Moses was saying to God here. Yeah, I know there's a Torah, I know there are rules, I know there are consequences, but you're a parent. It's not that I care more about the Jews, about Torah. You care more about the Jews than about Torah. Of course, Torah is the bond. God put his soul into Torah. Moses' Torah. But if you put everything in its context, as the Medrash that we quoted before was that we take precedence. It calls to mind for me that there's a former chief rabbi of Israel, whose son is now chief rabbi, is Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau. You may have seen him. He's quite a personality, a historical figure, a Holocaust survivor, and he's an awesome person to be in his presence, and I have been a number of times. I remember a few years ago, he came to Morristown, to the Rabbinical College, for our ordination ceremony. So we had, I don't know, 125 students graduating as rabbis, and even though he didn't do the actual testing and so on, but he put his name on the ordination because he was a ceremonial figure, and it was a very special gift to the students and the community to have him come. Comes from time to time to New Jersey. So he addressed the students and he told them a story. He comes from a city in Poland where his father was a rabbi. And his father was the rabbi, there was a great historical figure named Rabbi Meir Shapiro, Meir Lublin. If any of you have ever heard of Daf Yomi, this program where people study one page of Talmud a day, and they celebrate every 7 years to when they finish the entire Talmud. Rabbi Meir Shapiro was the man who came up with the idea, the Daf Yomi. And he was quite a leader. He was Hasidic, and very much a leader of Jewry in a general sense. So Rabbi Lau says that in his town, the story went that when Rabbi Meir Shapiro came to take the pulpit, he had been chosen to take the pulpit of this town in Poland, which was a well-known town. It was a prestigious pulpit, and he was very young. I think he was 22. A genius, that's why they chose him, but he was 22 and Hasidic, which some people didn't like. So he says, sort of Meir Shapiro came, he was hired, and it was the first time he came to the synagogue to address the people. So he spoke. And someone in the back, who was one of the antagonists against his appointment, raises his hand and says, Rabbi, I have a question. Sure, ask a question. The man says, do you believe in the resurrection of the dead? Torah believes that there is eventually, that someday, soon, hopefully today, Mashiach comes, the world changes for good, and afterwards there's a resurrection of the dead, where all the people who have passed on are brought back to life. This is one of it's a principle of Torah faith. So Rabbi Shapiro says, he obviously didn't mean that as a real question. He says, of course, it's one of the 13 principles of faith. So he says, the man says, okay, so how are you going to feel when you come back, or even if today, Mashiach comes today, and all the prestigious rabbis who were in this town for centuries are going to stand here? How are you going to stand in their presence? We've had such incredibly prestigious rabbis. Who are you going to be a rabbi to? So Rabbi Shapiro says, "That's a great question. My mazel, my luck is that I'll have my own congregation also being brought back from the dead, and like you, and I'll be a rabbi to my people. They'll be rabbi to their congregations. I'll be rabbi to my congregation." So then this wise guy says, what happens if none of your congregation merit a revival from the dead, merit coming back from the dead in the times of Mashiach? So he says, then Rabbi Shapiro became very serious. He said, a rabbi who would agree to be revived, resurrected, while his congregation is not being resurrected, is not a rabbi. If my congregation doesn't get resurrection, I won't be resurrected. Which is, it was his answer to this wise guy, but it was a lesson to his community that a rabbi is so connected with the people, and even if they don't merit resurrection, that means they've done something wrong. Saying, but I'm not coming back if they're not coming back. And Rabbi Lau was telling that to future rabbis, but I think it's the idea of what we see here from Moses, that there's a Moses without his people is not a Moses. Now, just to bring this to a close, if we go back to why did we choose this Torah portion to have Moses' name missing. It says, you shall command the children of Israel. The way that Rebbe explained this, Hasidic thought explains this Torah portion is God telling Moses, and we said that you means you in your essence, and you should give them a mitzvah. You command the children of Israel. But command is not only about, it means command in Hebrew, mitzvah means command, but the word mitzvah or tzavsa in Aramaic means to bond, to bind. So a mitzvah means a bond. When you do a mitzvah, you're binding yourself with God. But here, a Hasidic insight into what the verse is saying is, you, Moses, because of your essential connection to the Jewish people, you should bind the Jewish people to each other and to God. Not command, bring them together. And it would take you pure olive oil. What's the pure olive oil? I'll stop this here in a second. One of the things that Aaron did in the temple was that he lit the menorah. And lighting the menorah, as I mentioned here yesterday in Shul, lighting the menorah was illumination for the world, but it also symbolizes that Aaron ignited the souls of the Jewish people. The 7 branches of the menorah refer to 7 different personality types, and igniting the light, it meant igniting our souls, that we should feel a passion, an enthusiasm, a feeling of connection with God, being inspired. So Aaron, he inspired souls, but he inspired souls who were somewhat, they had to be poised for inspiration. Moses' job was bringing the oil. The oil is more subtle. The flame gets the attention, but the oil makes sure it's not a flash in the pan, and the oil is the real substance. Oil, in Torah thinking, that symbolizes faith. It symbolizes a fundamental connection. And Moses recognized, and that's what comes out in this Torah portion. Moses was the one, more than Aaron, who was able to see in every single one of his people, even those who were fighting him, even those who were repudiating him, even those who were saying, I don't want this Torah, I don't want this God, I don't want this Jewish identity. Moses knew that there is the basic element of connection, of faith within this person. And he needed Aaron to recognize that. Aaron was the one igniting. And Aaron could very possibly look at someone and say, there's nothing to ignite here. This is someone who just doesn't care. Someone's like, I got nothing to work with. And God tells Moses, you, in your essence, with your essential connection to the Jewish people, you bring the oil. You bring that awareness between the Jewish people to recognize that no matter how we may disagree with each other, and for good reason, ultimately, the oil, the fundamental connection, the faith that we have that we are a family is there, and the faith that we have in us being connected to God is there. And Aaron needed that awareness too. So specifically, in the Torah portion, where God is going to illustrate how Moses' connection with the Jewish people goes beyond his name. His name isn't there because God's reminding us that Moses was willing, out of his love for us, out of his connection to us, and some of us don't deserve it on the face of it. Out of his connection to us, he was willing to have his name taken out of the Torah. It's a Torah portion that shouts how much Moses loved us. And it shouts how much Moses loved us by leaving his name out of there. And which God, the Torah portion, does God choose to take the name out? In the Torah portion where it begins by saying, Moses, you recognize the essential connection between one Jew and another, and a Jew and God. Because you can see past all the layers of misbehavior. You can see past all the static. You know the essential character and the value of your people. That Torah portion, where Moses is told to bring the awareness to Aaron, that's the Torah portion. God chooses not to have Moses' name because it's the same thing. And at the end of the Torah portion, you can actually follow this thing through the whole Torah portion, but towards the end of the Torah portion, where there's the mitzvah of the incense altar, There are 11 different ingredients brought for incense, and one of them really smelled badly, which is pretty, counterintuitive. If you want something to have incense, it's supposed to smell good. So the Talmud tells us, any penitential prayer services, anytime we're getting together, we're really trying to connect with God, that do not include the participation of some sinners, does not qualify. In other words, we as a people means we as a people, even people who are not necessarily doing everything right by Torah. That symbolizes us. Why? Look at the smell of galbanum. It's foul. It was one of the elements of the ketores, of the incense, and yet the verse lists it with the ingredients of the incense. So, and that's also this Torah portion. So the idea, and this is, if you didn't already guess, this is an analysis that I heard from the Rabbi. This Torah portion specifically brings out the idea, this concept that leadership, specifically Moses, is the one who can see the inherent value in each one of the people. But it's not just for leaders. It's for, we're all supposed to be leaders in our sphere of influence. It's for us in our lives to be able to look at people and see their inherent value. Doesn't mean necessarily that now we're going to overlook or look away from something they're doing negative. No, of course not. As a matter of fact, if I care about someone, I have to care about them enough to correct them. But that does not, the fact that I have to correct them, or the fact that they're doing something that needs correcting, does not disqualify their essential value as a fellow human, as a fellow Jew, and certainly not as a child of God. So leave it over here. Is there any questions? Okay, that's resounding.
I have a question.
Go for it.
I heard what you said with regards to the difference between Moses's leadership and the women. I want to just address this issue, okay? Moses, and you and I sent you the Torah portion, Rashi, where he says what I have to read. Am I to the Jewish people? What am I, weak like a woman?
Yeah.
The point is, the women were given instructions just like the men were to wait, to be patient. Women generally protect their home. That's what we do. Let's assume we're going to be, people out there are going to say, why are you being gender specific? It's not politically correct. But let's assume for this purpose that I am not being politically correct. But the women generally protect their home. And the fact that the women did so when Moses was up, they had the patience to wait. They did what they could to ensure that they were respecting all the gifts that God gave, and refused to participate in the building of the golden calf. And yet we're being kind of grouped in with the men, and that idea is lost. I mean, how many people really?
Barbara, that's where you lost me. I'm not sure why. Why is that idea being lost? It shouldn't be lost. It's very valid.
Well, it's not something that I certainly learned outwardly. The fact that women, the fact that
what's the question?
This is my question.
That's a value. It's certainly a fact that the Torah brings up, the Medrash brings up, I bring up about how the women didn't do it. It's not being lost. It doesn't have to show up in every single place.
When a king, this is the question, and it starts out with a little comment. When a king goes out to fight in war, someone's got to take care of the home front. And the fact that the women didn't participate in that is a sense of leadership over the home while the man went out. I think that that's
100%.
very valued. Don't you agree that that's a very valued leadership quality?
Absolutely. Good, we're in agreement.
But when you mentioned your comments, you talked about how God wanted to destroy all the Jews, right, and start all over again because of what the men did. That evidences that there is a connection, kind of, that the women will take on the burden of what the man does, even if she hasn't participated in it. And I'm just saying that if there's going to be a true connection between man and woman, which is the most difficult theme throughout, humanity, shouldn't there be some types of teaching where women are respected for the home front that they value and protect while the man is out there? The man going out there and being a leader isn't any more important than the woman who maintained a sense of sensibility in the home front while the man went out there. Why is that lost in this story?
I totally agree with you. Shouldn't be
What do
lost.
you agree with?
I agree that that's tremendous value. That's why I send my kids to Jewish schools that teach them that the value of the woman and as what she does for the family and for the home and the leadership. So I totally agree with that.
Rabbi, I just have a.
Mendy, just to piggyback on that,
Yeah.
There are defined roles for women. And just hold on, let me finish my piece. There's never not been a respect for women running the home. I remember back, when I was a kid, and my grandfather, my grandmother kept a kosher home. She, with my bubba and my zeta, they kept kosher homes and they had responsibilities. They absolutely not only kept the home fires burning in many, many ways, but they also were respected, very, very much respected in the home. My grandfather never started to eat until my grandmother sat down at the table. Neither did my zeta with regard to my bubba. They were always appreciative of how the home ran so that my family could go out and run and develop what became a successful business. To me, there's never not been a respect for women and the role that they've played Jewishly.
Susan, I had the same experience growing up.
I
appreciate you saying it. I believe that that's the case. Obviously, it's not. They're going. Each home in each person is going to be individual. But I believe that that's definitely a Torah value you were experiencing, and I saw it myself growing up. Leon.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide a nuanced perspective, at least from my view. I'm not trying to create a fight between men and women. So I certainly acknowledge and understand that women were not participating in building the Golden Calf. So obviously they were better in that respect than men. At the same time, they did not attempt, or at least they did not stop men actively from building the Golden Calf. So at least in modern law, if a person is observing the crime and is not participating, I guess that person is also liable, right? So I would think that maybe from God's perspective, women were maybe not to the same extent liable as men, but maybe were liable because they were bystanders. They did not contribute to it, but they did not stop men either.
So yeah, Leon, you make a very good point. The only person from the whole Jewish people who could not be criticized in that way was Moses, because Moses was up the mountain. But everybody else, theoretically, they should have tried to stop it. At the same time, we are told is that the Jewish women tried to delay it. And they wouldn't give their jewelry, and they figured, and so they did try to delay it. One person tried to stop it, Hur, a man, Moses' nephew, and he was killed by the mob. So if other people, including Aaron and including the women, who knew better, but they saw that trying to stop them now would have led to bloodshed, then, and if they believed that Moses was coming any minute, then they allowed it to play out, but they didn't stop it. And Aaron, it really, I wouldn't say he never forgives himself, but he keeps bringing that up the rest of his life, how he didn't stop it. Jerry.
Something that I'm picking up from the discussion is Moses is name is absent from this book. But there's a parallel, with like God's name is also absent from the entire Torah, at least in a form that's pronounceable.
Okay.
There's a certain lack of representation and a need to have faith and trust in something we can't see. And that's sort of gets to the sin of the idolatry of the golden calf, that without seeing something, there's this compulsion to have something you could see and touch. And as Moses recedes and disappears, the people go nuts and need something to see. And yet it's very it's very similar to how God is absent in a similar way of being nameless. It's the unpronounceable tetragrammaton and other ways of referring to God,
Right.
but without his actual name. I thought that was
It's interesting parallel. Yes, there's an elusiveness to both. Yeah, got it. Well, good point. Thank you. Anybody else? Wish you a great week. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
See you. Bye.